All right, so for today's session, really we want to get into our Bible class of 2020. We had completed a full Bible class last year, 2018 and 2019. And basically we started. We had planned to start today anyway in church, and so it's maybe God's providence that we can start today via the technology medium of Zoom and YouTube. So our focus for this 2020, which I suspect will go into 2021 as well, is going to be on establishing that God has a plan, and maybe that is appropriate given what we know is happening in the world today, and what has happened with respect to COVID-19 and people not being able to move, and a lot of fake news, a lot of supposition about what is taking place. And as we turn to the Word of God, hopefully that will give us the direction we need going forward. All right. So today we begin looking at the book of Daniel, and our focus for that will, of course, be very recent to us, those of us who have studied our Sabbath school lesson last quarter. And this should be something that we've been accustomed to. So today, hopefully, we will not get too deep. We'll kind of establish some very early boundaries and establish what we're trying to accomplish with respect to this. I will continue to use the website, the rostrum.org, which is shown at the bottom here, at the bottom left, to post the presentations as we use them. So the one we're using today is already posted on that website, and there's other supplementary material that we'll use, and then we'll continue to post the presentations there, so you can download them from there if you need them for your own personal review and devotion thereafter. Is that okay for everybody?
Yeah.
All right. So this is supposed to be an interactive classes. So if you have questions, you can feel free to raise them. It's not just I alone drooling on and on, or I don't really mind talking forever. But if you have questions, then by all means, just simply unmute, and we will take your questions as we go along. Is that all right? So we can establish the ground rules for everybody. So let's get going. So today we want to talk a little bit about...
Uncle Fitz, before you continue,
yes,
there's an option to raise your hand since you're hosting, and you can just take the guesses they have questions.
Sure. Now where is the option, Gil?
Just go into participants.
Yes.
And you'll see whoever raises their hands in the list of names.
Right. You are not seeing my participant list, right?
Well, we can see everybody's, and we can also see, but you can take them in the...
I have a little dialogue up. You're not seeing that. You're just...
No.
All right, fine. So you can use that, right?
But Mel, I'm not seeing where the option to raise your hand, where that is.
Go into participants, and you'll see raise hand, yes, no. It's right at the bottom.
Yes.
See it?
Oh, yeah. Cool,
all right.
And then what I will do at the end, I will just issue 3 poll questions that we could use to kind of see how well we were able to follow
from here
on this session
so
today.
Tell me if that's what I need to do.
All right, so we ready?
Yeah.
All right, so today we want to talk a little bit about the fact that God has a plan. And as we do that, we will obviously want to take a brief review of world history. I wanted to start with that because kind of that is sort of giving us context. So today we will really cover some more contextual, instrumentational kind of things that we just need to know, because when we get deeper into the prophecies, we will need that to figure out how we interpret the prophecies. So today is really laying the ground.
Hello?
So I'll talk about somebody else.
Hello?
Hello?
Huh?
Are you on? And this is really well. We have 20 participants. Like I said, we won't have that in church any day, but that's great. All right, so let's keep going. So we wanted to give an overview of world history, but in the context of the Middle East. A lot of times when we talk about Bible history, we know that Bible history is centered around the Middle East and what in the old days was referred to as Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is really a old Greek word that has its origins in saying the land between two rivers, and those rivers are traditionally the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. And don't worry, I'll come to the maps in a bit. So fundamentally, when we talk about world history in the context of Bible prophecy, we are deliberately focusing on the Middle East. And I say that to say that obviously there were other civilizations occurring. There were civilizations and dynasties occurring in China and in Africa, etc. But the focus on the Middle East is because this was fundamentally where God's people were established and where they were supposed to then fan out, if you will, with a huge evangelistic effort. It was always God's view that his people would become evangelists to bring others into the fold. And along the way, that didn't work out as planned. You know, sometimes in the business world, we say you have to see work as done versus work as imagined. Sometimes my mother used to say that servants, some of these servants, they may help your hand but not your mind. And I know that at home, you ask people to do things to you, and when you get it back, what you had planned in your head is not what happened. In the case of the Jews, they were asked to basically do some planning for God and to handle God's business, but clearly they didn't do a good job. And so you found that because of all the problems that occurred, God's messaging spread as fast as it could, or as far as it could. But thank God today we have the opportunity to finish God's work. Amen. So we get to the point of reviewing world history in the context of the Middle East. And I just put up some very general things. This is, of course, a map of the world, which all of us should be familiar with. We have a sense of where Australia is, and China, and India. And in the middle, sort of here, if you follow my cursor, you begin to see that we have Turkey and Iran and Iraq, and you have Libya and Egypt and stuff around here, and Europe, etc. If you go to the John Hopkins website for coronavirus, all of these areas are showing red for coronavirus, right? So clearly that is what. Thank you for that insight. We've just cut off the background noise with the Galaxy Tab user, whoever that is. So that when they're ready, they can always unmute to come back in, right? So that is kind of where we are. Of course, we are on the western side of the world, but in those old days, this would have been where civilization would have been the cradle of civilization, we like to talk. And a lot of stuff would have been happening here across the world. There's always geopolitics, of course. Today, we know that Russia is exercising itself as a big world power. China is a big world power. And then you have America, of course, is considered to be one of the largest powers in the world, notwithstanding how they seem to be handling their coronavirus. That's the next story, but they're supposed to be a powerful nation, right? So in the ancient days, however, the dynamics were not as clear as it is now. And a lot of the power grab, if you will, in the world would have been occurring around this area here in the Middle East. So we had the Mediterranean Sea, and then you had the Persian Gulf on this side, right? So a lot of the scramble for how who control the world would have occurred in this general region here, which is more to the east as opposed to the Western world, where you then had the United States. And if you remember, when the New World was founded, as it was called, people would have left here in Europe and headed across to the West, and that's why we are called the West Indies in terms of Columbus looking for the Indies by heading west, and then Christopher Columbus would have also come to the New World and establish America and the others that came after that, and the Pilgrims, etc. We'll come to all of that later. So I just give a sort of broad overview and insight. Today, if we were to just break that out a little bit more, I thought we would do that because we have a chance to kind of see how this matches with respect to some of the nations around this area. Again, we're talking about Iraq and Iran, and this is the area where we have what is referred to as the Fertile Crescent. where the Tigris and the Euphrates flows. And then notice where Turkey is. Turkey is a kind of important bit and piece. We have Greece. We know the Greek. When we talk about Alexander the Great, we talk about Greek. And then don't worry about Romania as being referenced to Rome. The real reference to Rome would have been Italy. All right? And this is where Italy is now established. I just want to make sure that in our heads we understand where these locations are, because as we start to get into the prophecies, we need to try to understand the dynamics. One of the things I want to also establish is that in a way you could argue if you were to draw the cardinal points here. So if for instance, I were to just put the cardinal points here and say that this is east, sorry, and then this is west, you would find that Italy is more in Western Europe. Is that a fair expectation? And that you would then have Turkey being in more Eastern Europe. The other thing you need to appreciate is that Israel as a nation is somewhere right here, right? And this is a strip of land with the Mediterranean Sea to the west and Syria and some of the larger nations to the east. Now, if you think about that, and again, you draw a line here, you would find that Egypt is south of Israel, and then Syria, and keep that word Syria in your head because we must remember the Assyrian kingdoms were some of the bigger kingdoms before when we talked about Nineveh in the days of Jonah, etc. Those are the Assyrian kingdom. Syria is north of Israel, as well as Turkey being north of Israel. So those are just things to keep in mind. Italy is to the west of Europe, Turkey is to the east of Europe, and when you use Israel as a marker, then you find that Syria is to the north and Egypt is to the south, right? So just kind of keep that in mind when we get later on to talk about kings of the north and kings of the south, that it becomes extremely important. And I will come to talk a little bit about the history of this region as we go forward. Any questions so far? If you don't have any, then I just assume we can go forward, right? So let's keep going. So I realize my annotations are still showing here. Right, so this is just a blow up of that same area. And again, I want to recognize that Israel is here. And again, if you draw a line through Israel, this is north, this is south. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, south. Syria, Turkey, Iraq, north. Italy is to the west of Europe. Turkey is to the east of Europe. We okay with that? Again, just don't worry about the repetition. That's important. The more we go over it, the better it is for us as we go forward. So Mesopotamia really is the place between two rivers, and if you think about it, Mesopotamia would have been in this kind of, sorry, let me just go back. In this kind of general area around here. I thought I had an arrow on this map, and I didn't put it in, but that's all right. So Mesopotamia would have been in this general area, and it also parts of modern day Iran, Syria, and Turkey. Were you all right with that? All right. So there's a method to the madness there. Kind of keep all these thoughts in your head. Let's talk about the Assyrians. Note at the time in which the Assyrians were controlling the world. Again, and when I use the world, I am talking about this area, right? So it's not that the other parts of the world didn't exist, but from a biblical perspective, when we talk about the world, we're talking about Iran, Syria, and Turkey. Were you all right with that? Somebody is giving me feedback.
The galaxy, the galaxy.
The time in which the Assyrians were controlling the world. Galaxy person?
Galaxy 830, the 830 person.
Galaxy. What they muted? Syria and Turkey. Rodney, I don't know who I can.
Uncle Feds, you can mute them.
Galaxy 830, all right, I'll get him. Right, I get him. Thank you, Tyrese. You are my assistants. Once you see them, let us know and we will take them out, right? Next time I will give you host privileges. You can take them out as well. All right, so the Assyrians, and whenever I want to talk about the Assyrians, only because the Assyrians would have been predating Babylon. So when in the Old Testament we were talking about some of those empires that were attacking Jerusalem, the Midianites, the Moabites, the Canaanites, etc., we'd have been kind of talking, and we obviously know about the Egyptian kingdom and the fact that Pharaoh would have persecuted God's people. We have been talking about some of these kingdoms. So you have the Egyptians here, you have the Assyrian Empire, and the Assyrians would have had a kind of colorful history where sometimes they were in power and then they went through a demise and then they came back up in the power again. Remember, these are long periods of history. Yeah? So you get a sense of that. So, and you obviously know about the Egyptian kingdom. So that galaxy person insisted on unmuted. We will have to show them out there. He's waiting.
Practicing.
Right. So the key is really to appreciate that in this area, which is again similar to the maps we saw before. If I just go back to that. So this is just modern day and this is old days, right? So again, it didn't have all these demarcations over Turkey and Syria and stuff. But the Assyrians were controlling as far as up towards today known as Greece, and again north of Jerusalem, and then you had the Egyptians kind of controlling the south. But the Assyrians were considered to be a major power, and they were in power around 824 BC, and then around 671 BC. When we talk about Mesopotamia, we like to talk about between 5000 BC, right? That's best as I can write with scribble, all the way down to just after Christ, right? Which is AD. So just bear that in, yeah, that's AD. Just bear that in mind. All right, so that's kind of where we're at with that. We talk about the Assyrians and then the Babylonians, our good friends, who would feature a lot in the book of Daniel. So in the Babylonian Empire, which was around 606 BC, and remember in BC counting, we are kind of counting down, right? So we started from around 5,000, we are coming down. So they're heading towards the birth of Christ. This is before Christ. So again, Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which is modern day Iraq. This is where the Babylonians would have control. I always remember that during the Persian War that took place, the last Persian War, the Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein was in control of Iraq, he will sometimes refer to himself as the modern day Nebuchadnezzar. And that was not just idle boast, because the heritage of Iraq would have been the Babylonian Empire. So Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and again, because these rivers were flowing into the sea here to the Persian Gulf, they represented a very fertile area for planting. Agriculture was, of course, the dominant industry, and so this is referred to as the Fertile Crescent. So whoever controlled here basically controlled the food basket and also the commerce, because the main way of traveling would have been through the sea, Mediterranean Sea to the west, if you will, and then the Persian Gulf here on this side, and then you had the Red Sea on this side, right? So that's fundamentally where the Babylonians control. So again, modern day Turkey would have been part of what Babylon control, and we kind of see that. I'll come back to that in a bit, right? The Romans, however, the Roman Empire was a different kettle of fish. The Romans weren't settling just in the Mesopotamian area. The Romans conquered almost all of Europe, way up even into what is today known as UK and Britain and stuff, right? So the Romans were a huge, huge power, and they really control a lot of space. So when you talk about Rome, I go back to my annotations. When you talk about Rome, you had to talk about East and Western Rome. So in the earlys, when Rome became a huge power, you had Eastern Rome was kind of like the center, and Italy was the center. And as the years went on, you found that Rome kind of migrated more to the east, and Turkey, Constantinople, which is today known as Istanbul, became more the central power for Rome at that point in time. This is a real telescopic view of Rome when I say that, because this has been happening over centuries. But the point to note here is that over time, the Romans kind of migrated and evolved their kingdom more towards the east than to the west. Now, this is extremely important. I could just make that point quickly, but we'll always come back there. A lot of times when we talk prophecy, we like to talk people and pagan Rome. The fact is, I like to call it civil Rome and religious Rome. So civil Rome would have been kind of controlling all these areas at one point in time. And then after Christ's death and stuff, and the disciples and Christianity was growing, we would have found that Rome started to migrate more towards the east. Constantinople became the center, and that's where the civil rulers started to run and control things. But kingdoms are not static. So a lot of times there was a lot of fighting occurring here, and some of the nations and the barbarian tribes would be attacking Rome. And the Romans made a very a kind of political decision to say, listen, while we are concentrating our empire to the east, what we know is that in the western side, we are still Rome, but we don't really have an emperor who could control all this space. It wasn't today's world where you could use aeroplane and internet to control. So they said, look, you, the Church of Rome, and the emperor of the church, which was the Pope at the time, you would become not just a religious power, but a civil power as well. And that was one of the early situations where we had a marrying or a coming together of church and state. So that they then came together, and you would have found that around Italy and stuff, and more east, more western Rome, it was run by the church and given full political power, because the Romans were saying, well, we can't be quite all up here, seeing about down here. You see about that, you make laws and you run the place and you grant civil powers. And that is significant because as it grew to the point where that domination spread during the Middle Ages all the way to the east. All right, so I just given that context to begin to understand and appreciate what is taking place. Everybody all right? All of here. You see about that, you make laws that you run the place.
Basil, are they mute?
Basil is the man who could not now? Better find him here. All right, I'm going to send him off. We're taking him off. Right. Thank you, Tyrese. Moving it, I like it, email. I like that. Right. So we come to the Persians. And I know I kind of jumping in and out, but the Persian Empire would have been before the Roman Empire. So if you notice the Persians in the same general area, we go back, the Romans were controlling a lot of the sea and all the Europe and all that kind of thing. The Persians, however, with our good friend Artaxerxes and King Ahasuerus and all that, the Persians went beyond just Europe, and the Persians went all the way down to India. Again, if you're a good Bible student, you're not surprised at that, because you would remember, that when we read the book of Esther, the queen that Esther replaced, her full name was what? Vashti. And Vashti is, of course, an Indian name, right? So clearly,
What is your person?
how's you, Mel?
Right. So, what was the problem before? Right.
Right, so we're going again. Yes, remember that Vashti would have been one of the queens of the Persian king Ahasuerus when Esther was there. And so you could appreciate that, let me take out all these markers, right? You'd appreciate that the Persian Empire spread from Egypt and stuff to the west and all the way to the east and covered the eastern lands. And whenever I talk about the Persian Empire, those who were in the Bible class last year know that I like to refer to the movie The 300. It's just not a nice movie to watch, but from an academic point of view, it's good because it shows the strength of the king Xerxes at the time, who was fighting the Spartans. So the Greeks would come after the Persians. All right, so again, notice that Israel would have been somewhere around here, where you see my mouse now. And they too would have also been under the complete control of the Assyrians. I know it's plenty, but let's keep it, right? The Byzantine Empire was an empire that came out of the Romans, and again, they were more to the east. And I'm moving kind of quickly now because I don't want you all to get lost. And let's talk a little bit about Bible lands, right? So just again, some quick maps to recap all that we just discussed. The Bible lands, when we talk about them, we're really talking about Southern Europe as opposed to Northern Europe, Norway, and some of the others up here. We're talking the Middle East, we're talking Asia Minor, down in this area, we're talking Northern Africa, right? And then important ancient lands, we'd have talked about Rome, Greece, Macedonia. The 7 churches of Asia were around Turkey, which is where Turkey is today. We talk about the Medo-Persian Empire, the Babylon Empire. We talk about Canaan and Israel around here. We talk about Egypt, the Mediterranean Sea. Again, just giving you a geological reference. You know, this week, Roshan Parasam produced his first geological information system for Trinidad that showed the map of the coronavirus. And a few of my friends said they moved into Miaru because there was nothing down there, right? So this is a geological review of geographic review of the Middle East and the ancient lands that occurred down there. Some people postulate, I don't necessarily think it's important to be clear about that, that the Garden of Eden was around the area of modern-day Iraq, where we have the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. We will find out when we get to heaven, right? But that is the kind of general view around that. And then some would have also told us that Mount Arafat, which was where Noah's Ark was landed, would have been somewhere around Turkey. Again, just showing that this was the bed of civilization as recorded in the Bible. These are the lands that were always coming up over and over again. The Tower of Babel would have also been in the same area, Assyrian kingdom at the time, when they were building the Tower of Babel. And again, that would have been occurring around the area of Iraq, Iran, Persian Gulf, Mediterranean Sea, Red Sea, etc. Just keeping your bearings and keeping us going, right? Israel, the strip of land and expanded. We know that Israel would have, after the death of David and Solomon and stuff, would have had a dividing of Israel between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, Judea and Israel, etc., different kings. But know that the Moabs and Edomites are around them, even as they are trying to run their country of Israel and Judea. That becomes important when we get to Daniel chapter 12, when it talks about the Edomites and the Moabites, which you just studied in about 2 or 3 weeks ago in your Sabbath school lesson. They were around and within the vicinity of Israel, and sometimes they would be brutal enemies who would fight Israel over and over again. Again, we just kind of recapping, and we get to the Assyrian Empire, and we show that again, the Babylonian Empire, same kind of general area. The Persian Empire with a lot more of its reach heading towards the east. And then Alexander the Great, who would have also been a powerful Greek nation. Tell me, Tyrese.
Nice, Sean.
Sean,
That is
Galaxy man. Yeah, we take him out. Yeah, we take them out. Right, and we up to 26 participants. Isn't that amazing? Pastor, we need to do this when church come back to normal, yes? We get more people. All right. And then the Roman Empire settled more to the west, a little bit to the east. Turkey is here. And then you see where Judea is, right? All of that is just to get your bearings right. And then I want to just come back to the Babylonian Empire, because that is where Daniel is structured. And we begin to get a sense that this was the main city of Babylon around the Tigris and Euphrates River. This is important. When we get to Daniel chapter 5 with Belshazzar and his demise, you would recall that they would have blocked the Euphrates River, which was running through the city, and able to enter the city and overtake the king, right? But just kind of have a sense of the stretch of Babylon. Think about this, and I'll come back to that in a bit. know that the Israelites have been living here because they'd already moved into Israel. And when Nebuchadnezzar made his sojourns and his conquests, he would have moved to the west here, take up Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and others, and then carry them back here to Babylon. And that on the paper and on our presentation looks like a short distance. Those would almost months or almost a year marching to get them across on that side, because this is terrestrial type travel, right? So there's no boat, there's no plane. They're really walking on the sea to get to the various points as we go along. Everybody okay? Great. Let's keep going again. So I want to talk, now that we have the kind of geographical background clear in our heads, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we deal with prophecy, and in particular Adventism. And this, while I put prophecy and Adventism here, as I will go on, you will realize that this is not unique to us as Adventists, but this is actually common in the theological world in understanding how prophecy is determined. In terms of the Adventist view and how we see things, we understand that God uses different talents within his church. I cannot sing a note, but some people are better at singers, right? So that's our talent. Some people are good at organizing, some people are good at hospitality, administration, etc. So everybody has different talents, and among the talents God has given to his church is the talents of related to prophecy. So prophecy is one of the gifts of the church, which we actually believe it's an identifying mark of God's last day church. So you have had in the Old Testament examples of people who gave prophecies, and I'll come back later on. You know, William Johnson, who was an old Adventist General Conference president, he wrote an interesting piece that talks about classical versus apocalyptic prophecies, and I'll talk a little about that as we move on, right? But note, you know, this quarter we are studying Bible and how the origins of the Bible. And one of the key texts we repeat when we talk about the Bible is the one that says, holy men speak as they were moved by God. And it's important to note that one of the pillars of Christianity is to appreciate that we subscribe to the view that God provides what we call thought inspiration. In other words, God impresses a man or a woman, and that person captures the thoughts God put in their head into words, which is what we then read. Holy men spake as they were moved by God. That word move has its origins into saying that the Holy Spirit impresses the person. So some of you know that. I have seen Tyrese already being moved by a young lady, and then when he speaks, what comes out of his mouth is because he was moved by her beauty and her good looks, right? So in a similar way, you don't need to answer that, Tyrese. I just take it for granted. In a similar way, God will have moved upon men. So that's why Peter says, for prophecy never came by the will of man, but holy men spake as they were moved by the Holy Spirit. So God will impress upon man, and then they will write. But that's important because we don't necessarily believe in word prophecy, but in thought prophecy. Because sometimes we feel we must pay attention to the specifics of the words. But one of the best ways to interpret the Bible is to have the context and to understand why certain things were being said and what was the context in which it's being said. The old pioneers of the Christian church after 1844 used to say, scripture for scripture, text for text. In other words, if you could cross-reference a text with another text, then you found yourself in a good place in trying to understand what is being said. All right? So when you tell me a little wine is good for the stomach's sake, and that means you could drink alcohol, I cross-reference that to another text that says my body is a temple of God and I should not defile it. Right? And if the context suggests that it doesn't line up, then I don't drink. I don't know if that's falling in anybody garden today, know that you're on lockdown and you have nothing else to do. I don't know who testing that theory, but anyway. So that was just to emphasize that. The other thing I wanted to emphasize is that from a purely dictionary definition, prophecy is about prediction of the future and the influence of divine guidance, right? So it assumes that somebody has divine guidance under which they provide future. Now there's a key text that is very important to us in the Adventist Church that says, Isaiah 8:20, to the law and the testimony, if they speak not accordingly, then there is no truth in them. So I see a lot of WhatsApp images floating around from people who said that somebody actually floated to me a Nostradamus prediction that suggested that this virus would come. Some people found a fictitious novel that was written some years ago and they highlight the various pages and they put that up. And I simply smile and say, nice, because that has nothing to do with my biblical prophecy, because I look to the law and the testimony. Is that all right? So we just need to understand that. So we keep going with that. But when we get to the Bible, however, and we get to Exodus chapter 7, verses 1 and 2, it says, the Lord said to Moses, see that I have set you as a God to Pharaoh, and Aaron, and I should have maybe put that God in capital G, but anyway. But it's as a God because the Egyptians thought they had many different gods. And Aaron, your brother, shall be your prophet. You shall speak all that I have commanded you, and Aaron, your brother, shall speak to Pharaoh. In other words, Aaron was a mouthpiece for God and for Moses. Moses, when he was given the commission to go and release the Israelites, he said, I don't have an army, I don't have any political standing. How do I do that? And God said, go, I will send you. And then he turned his scarf into a snake and all that, just to prove it was really God and all that. But when he was, one of the complaints Moses made, as some of us do, when the nominating committee comes back and give us an office, Moses said, look, I can't talk. And God God, in those days, he was having a nice relationship with Moses. He didn't feel to tap him. So he said, all right, let me bring your brother. So he brought Aaron. Now Aaron, when Aaron came, Aaron didn't have the same experience as some of us. Somebody on again, Travis. Tell me one up in one.
Basil.
That easy.
Basil giving me all trouble,
Yeah. We will set up joint hosts next week, so you can knock him off as they come up, right? So yeah, the key is if you're participating as a Zoom participant, then you really don't need to have YouTube on because they provide feedback. If you're just looking on as a YouTube participant, that's fine, because you're not on Zoom. You really can't be on either. You can be on both at the same time. That's a good technique to learn anyway in life. A good story in life. You can be two places at the same time. All right. Yeah, so the point is that Aaron's job was to say what God and Moses said. And that really sums up the prophet. The prophet wasn't meant to have a prominent place himself, but the prophet was meant to be an emissary, a medium by which God would speak to the people. And I like that because, today's world, as Christians, we are called to present God's word to the world. And a lot of times it gets to our head, and we like to think that we are the most important thing. But if you remember how this question of prophecy and Aaron comes about, really, when we live for Christ, people are not supposed to see us, but they're supposed to see Jesus Christ. And that's really, really important to me. So they really want to create a space where you want to be able to present God's word in such a way that it is not about you. People don't flock. And that's why I sometimes have difficulty with these people who follow specific preachers and only want to go when this one preaching and stuff. They really want to be moved by the word of God and not the person who is giving the word. Because God's word is really what we're heading for. So the prophet was really meant to be transparent and one that will allow God's word to shine through him and get to the people on the other side. I think we understand that concept as we go forward. Note that the prophet is not an astrologer. The prophet cannot tell you that because you're born today, you will be like everybody else who born on this day for the last 100 years. That don't make sense. The prophet is not witchcraft either, right? Not fortune telling. We don't read a palm, well, not really. The prophet doesn't read a palm and then tell you what they are. The prophet really is about speaking what God has said. Holy men speak, God divine appointed spokesman conveys God's message to his people. Is that all right? So again, that kind of puts the prophet in a very self-effacing way. The prophet is not one who is prominent and bigger than God and the messenger. The message, you know, the one who gave him the message, he is lined up as things are. Right, so everybody okay with that up to that point? Any questions? Maybe I should do that and stop at each section and just ask if there are questions. Any questions? Because I kind of feel like I just running through and I'm not sure if anybody has questions. So, any questions? No?
Good to go.
All right, let's keep going. Right, so the other thing is, having established that prophecy is really thought inspired. In other words, God moves by the Holy Spirit and then people speak. The question is, how do we interpret prophecy? And I want to suggest that there are four isms when we interpret prophecy. There is one called preterism. And if you remember from your little days in school, that prefix pre really means before, right? Like you have a preface in a book or you have the preceding items. And then there is idealism, there is historism, and then there is futurism, right? So these are four buckets. These are not my inventions. This is well documented in history and in literature and in those who study theology and ancient words, etc. Right? So the view is that you can have four approaches in terms of how you interpret prophecy. Now, whenever we do the Bible class, I am sometimes tempted to ignore this, but I keep coming back because I like to think that when we start to engage other people, and you have to really be careful about how you engage people who don't share your same religious belief on prophecy, because everybody sees things differently, and that is why the key is to present Jesus Christ. If we present Jesus Christ, then Christ draws people onto him and things happen. So don't use this to say, well, you know, we studied this and this is the truth and I want you to get it in your head. That people are turned off by that. They are more turned on by Jesus Christ and his love, his comfort to us. And then as they are drawn to Jesus, they start to study God's word and God reveals himself to them. But there is no doubt that there is a plethora of beliefs out there in the world when you read the prophecies of Daniel and the Revelation. I mean, I can talk to 3 or 4 of my friends and I can hear 3 or 4 different interpretations of the prophecies of Daniel and the Revelation. And I want to suggest to you today that they can fall into these buckets of either preterism, idealism, historism, or futurism. And we'll talk about them in a little bit, and I'll do a quick example so you understand how it works. That is, again, all of this is background because I want you to have a context before we dive into the book. And then when we run in, you're just looking for argument points to carry to your friends. I want you to also have a real appreciation for this, to the point where you have what I like to call an eureka moment, an aha moment. You must look at it and say, I didn't think about that, you know. And it develops a greater passion to study God's word. So let's talk about the different belief systems. Preterism is a view that interprets prophecies in the Bible, especially Daniel and Revelation, as events that have already happened in the 1st century AD. So some people talk about a Roman emperor called Antiochus Epiphanes, and he was one of those who put the pig on the in the synagogue in Jerusalem after the destructions of the Christians. And again, there's another there's another television series I love to refer to when I do this. It's AD, the Bible Continues, which is pretty good. in terms it's on should be on YouTube, and some of it is on Apple TV and a few other platforms, maybe Netflix, now that you have time. But that shows a lot of what happened after Christ had died and how the Jews struggled and the Christianity struggled to come forward, right? But there's a view, if you will, that ancient Roman emperor called Antiochus Epiphanes, that his attack of Israel was so dramatic that they feel that clearly this is what the prophecies were talking about when they talk about Antichrist and somebody who will rise up against God and be against God, etc. And so if you adopted a pretheism approach to interpreting Bible prophecy, you would find that you would center a lot of your interpretation around that event in the early century after Christ. All right, so it says that, you know, it also points to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, which kind of says that those were the events that the ancient prophecies were pointing to. People who follow preterism are normally called preterists, but I mean, labels and stuff don't really matter. The point here is to suggest that you can interpret the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation in the context of the terrible times Israel went through as a nation in AD 70. Now, if that is the case, then the consequence of that would be that when things are occurring in the world today, we are likely not to see them as being related to the prophecies, because as far as this approach to Bible prophecy is concerned, those things already happened. So this must be something else that is occurring, and therefore a lot of different beliefs now about how it will happen when Christ comes, they kind of supersede what the prophecies are saying. So you can tell from my whole demeanor in which I presented this, that this is not a preferred approach. So I can draw X through this one, right? In case it wasn't too sure. So let's keep going. After pretheism, remember that the other ism, if you will, is idealism, I think it was. Oh, I want to do this graphic. So this graphic is, because I know you won't remember all this sort of lyrics here, because I just words. And you're not, but this graphic is, I thought, an interesting one, right? So this says, at the time of the prophet, whoever the prophet was, whether it was Daniel or John, things have already happened, right? So it says not great, it's already happened. And then anything else that has happened between or after is just interesting, but it really not related to the prophecies. That is the problem about that. Now, the consequence of all of that is that you kind of approaching the future, not too sure what's going to happen. So when you experience a pestilence like we're experiencing today in this pandemic, and you kind of want to line up with the conspiracy theories, because in your head, prophecy doesn't help you now, because you have already used up all your prophetic assets, if you will, to say that it happened already in AD, in the early AD centuries. So there's almost nothing to guide you at this point in time, which is a shame. So that is one of the downfalls, if you will, of pretheism. So I could talk about idealism, but I could tell you in a nutshell, idealism is like an allegory. It kind of says that a lot of what is given in the Bible is really symbolic, and it is meant, it's not literal, it's meant to just show the conflict between good and evil, and it doesn't have any real significance to real and modern day events. I always like when I talk about an allegory, I refer to Animal Farm by George Orwell, which was required reading when we were in school in the 1970s and early 80s. But George Orwell wrote about these animals who took over the farm, and then they said that because they are now in control under the farmer, they will have equal rights to everybody, and everything was going nice. And then one day the pig went into the house and he asked the horse and the dog to bring food for him, and they say, how come you want us to serve you? And he says, well, some are more equal than others. Animal Farm looked like a nice little story until we realized that George Orwell was really depicting communism and the Russian Empire, and suggesting that communism started off with this ideal of we are all equal, but then some became more equal than others. So that's an allegory, if you will, and it's kind of saying that the animals don't really matter and they're not significant. What is important is the message it sends that there is a world that can develop around this way. So some people look at the Bible, Daniel Revelation, and they come to the view, if you will, that those stories are really stories about good versus evil, and they're really just there to give us guidance, but they have no specific meaning to things in the world, right? So again, if we accept that, and you go to our diagrams, it just says you're kind of trapped in a timeline because, you know, everything is everything. You're not too sure if anything means anything anymore, that kind of thing, right? And it doesn't have any meaning. So in idealism, people grab at straws. They come up with all kind of fancy theories. Some people feel that, you know, the world is just, and I, you know, have a friend of mine, he would tell me that we are an experiment placed here by aliens, and aliens will come back for us one day and see how the experiment goes. Because the Bible doesn't really convey any real meaning to him. So that is idealism. We then come to futurism. Oh, by the way, I could go back to my annotation and tell you clearly again from my tone, we do not accept that idealism is correct and the approach towards prophetic interpretation. Is that okay? We then come to futurism. So futurism is a view now that is almost the alter ego of preterism. Preterism said it happened already, and therefore what going on now is just stuff. Futurism say it didn't happen yet, it'll happen in the future. All right, and it is nothing that going on here now is of big importance. The prophecies are really pointing to things that will happen way when Christ comes. Now you have had some of that come into your gate sometimes and knocking and holding Bible studies with you. That is very strong on this approach. They see things into the future. When Christ comes, there will be a literal period, and then people come back. Some of those who believe in the rapture, that people just disappear from the world at some point in time. All of that is kind of tied up into this futurism thinking, right? So the problem is that the present time almost have you with a headache because you're not too sure. So this is the time of the prophet, whoever got the prophecy, Daniel or John. And the period in between seems almost irrelevant because you're really looking for things that will happen in the end. Now that is, you might think of, you know, when we put it this way, it looks far-fetched, but think about it carefully. Some people, that is kind of comforting. It kind of says, I can handle my own stories, look after myself, and then down the road, when things really go haywire, I'll get ready for Christ. And that is maybe the danger with futurism and this approach to say that things will happen in the future. Then we come to historism. Again, I have changed my tone, my whole intonation has changed because you could tell I have a passion for historism, right? Historism is a view that interprets some of the prophecies, just clear my screen, some of the prophecies in the Bible, especially Daniel Revelation, as being fulfilled in a continuous line from ancient Jewish history through to the end of the ages or the end of the world, right? Depending on the eschatology. So what this is saying is that in historism, we believe that the plan, and as I go back to say today, the theme for this Bible class in 2020 into 2021 is God has a plan. All right. So that is important. You know, sometimes I am asked to do things in this house immediately and one time, and when it look like I don't really take it on, it's because they don't know that I have a plan in my head. So God has a plan in his head, right? And sometimes it may look as if he's not taking us on, but God has a plan. And it's important during this time of unease and lacking in hope and people unsure about the future, to remember God has a plan. And really, when we talk historism, we are saying that God's plan is constantly unfolding in front of us. And that is extremely important. You kind of see how the thing works out, right? So in historism, notice the smile on the character's face, because just like me, he believes this is the right thing. And it gives you a kind of peace from seeing that God is in control of the past, the present, and the future. So again, one thing to note, we keep seeing this section here that I want you to remember. Whenever we get prophecies, the prophetic vision or whatever message was given seems to begin from the time of the prophet and then towards the future. Is that okay? And why is that important? Because when we deal with Daniel, we realize that Daniel's prophecies span. Tyrese, tell me. Basil again. Basil, you have a question?
No, not yet.
All right, great. We muted you. Right. Right. So the thing is that yeah, what I was gonna say, Chomov, yes, he's such a good fellow. Yeah, the thing about the prophecies is that they start from the time of the prophet towards the end of time. So in Daniel's case, he starts with a prophecy that speaks around Babylon. Was Babylon the first kingdom in the world? No. Because when I did these sections earlier, that's why I deliberately did that. We saw that there were Assyrian kingdoms and there were other kingdoms before Babylon. But this prophecy came to the prophet Daniel while he is in Babylon. So the prophecy goes from Daniel's time to the end of time. Is that okay? When we get to Revelation, similarly, you will realize that a lot of Revelation's messages go from John's time in the first world, in just after Christ had died, in the New Testament times, all the way towards the end of time. So that's another, I'm not saying it's a foolproof method, but it's just a characteristic you need to pay attention to, that the prophecies tend to span from the time of the prophet to the time of the end. And that is why historism is such a good method of interpretation, because it kind of says that along the way, we are seeing markers as we move towards the end of time. God is actively working in history, and as he goes along, he identifies different things, yes? So I'm at peace because I know in the end, God will win. But even though drama is happening along the way, earthquakes are happening, floods and hurricanes. By the way, we've been told that the hurricane season coming up this year will be an active one. So after you get over Corona, get ready for a hurricane. While we go through all that drama, God has a plan, and he's in charge, and he's making things happen, and he's working in a particular way. All right, let's keep moving. So I can summarize them to say to you that they are basically, I'm trying to slow down. I know I'm talking a bit fast, and I want to make sure you don't get lost. So we can follow pretheism. Everything has already happened, and it happened around 80, the early 80th century. Futurism, things will happen in the future. Idealism, don't worry about all of that. Nothing specific is going to happen. This is just symbolism, or good over evil, and one day good will triumph over evil. That's a nice stuff, but we believe in historism, which is that it portrays in symbolic presentations the course of history unfolding from the first century until the end of time. So that's a revelation. But in Daniel's case, it will be from Daniel's time to the end of time. I think I made this slide when we were doing the Revelation section of these studies. So I wanted to use an example for you, just to kind of bring all of this home. It came from actually our Sabbath school lesson last quarter. So I'm not taking credit for that. I'm not expanding the messenger beyond the message, right? So he says, in order to understand how these approaches differ, consider the Antichrist. We want to hear terms the Antichrist. Pretheism equates the Antichrist with Antiochus IV, which is Antiochus Epiphanes, which occurred in the early 80th century. So pretheism say the Antichrist happened then. Futurism views the Antichrist as a world leader that will come and appear in the future. So a lot of people, when And it started way back in the 80s with Reagan, right? When Reagan became president of the US, there were some people who could use all kind of maths and who called Reagan's name and said, easy mark at the beats. When Obama became president, some people said he is a Muslim and he can't be the president and something wrong, and he mark at the beats as the Antichrist. So futurism can always looking for somebody who will come in the future. Omen, the movie in those days when we used to watch that, we'll look for some man who had 666 and mark up upon his head. This week I saw a lot of people saying how Bill Gates wants to implant a chip in us so we can buy and sell, and that's the mark of the beast. We'll talk about all that when we get to the Revelation section. But I want to assure you that that is not how it works, right? And then for idealists, they would say, well, the Antichrist represents any evil power that oppresses God's people and opposes the gospel. Historicists, on the other hand, would identify the Antichrist with the papacy, whose power and influence extended from the Middle Ages to the end of the world. So there's a whole different approach, if you will, to how we see the future and how we see things go. All right? A few key points. We are not guessing when we accept, or just because we like it and it feels nice, are we accepting historicism as the approach? Daniel himself, when we look at Daniel chapter 2, and I don't need to pull it up now, that's your homework, but you have nowhere to go this evening anyway or tomorrow. So you can read the book, right? Daniel chapter 2, when Nebuchadnezzar got the vision, and he got up and he didn't know what it was. When Daniel interpreted the vision, he said, you saw an image like a man with the head of gold, breasts and arms of silver, belly of brass, feet of iron and clay. And then the stone that destroyed it, right? But he didn't stop there. Daniel gave the interpretation of the dream. And he went on to say, you are the head of gold, Babylon. A kingdom will come after you, and then another one will come after you, and another will come after you, and then God himself will come and his kingdom will last forever. So Daniel, in interpreting Daniel chapter 2, he adopted a historicist approach. He didn't say, well, don't worry about that king, this will only happen in the early 1800s, so you don't need to worry about it now, that's preterism. He didn't say, don't worry about that, that will happen only towards the end of time, that's futurism. He didn't say, don't worry about that, them four kings are just representative of good over evil, that is idealism. No, he said to him, you are the head of gold, meaning that you, right now, you are part of history. And over time, history will develop until Christ comes. So he goes towards the end of time, right? In addition to this, Jesus, when he talked about the destruction of Jerusalem, and we may want to spend some time on Matthew chapter 24 and 25 at some stage, and we may do that as we go along. But in Matthew chapter 24, an interesting thing happens. Jesus is about to be crucified, and as he leaves the temple, he sits upon the Mount of Olives and he looks at Jerusalem in all its glory with its vast, lovely white marble temple and its golden dome and the sunset bouncing off it. And it looks really nice. And then he talks about this in Great Controversy, the very first chapter. And the disciples come to him and he said to them, this place will be destroyed. And they assume that if you're going to destroy Jerusalem, it had to be the end of the world. So they came to him and they said, when will these things be? And when will be the end of the world? Because in their head, if you destroy this beautiful temple, it must be the end of the world. Jesus answered both questions. He told them when Jerusalem will be destroyed in AD 70, but he also talked about when the world will be destroyed many centuries later. And by the way, in that he says there will be wars, rumors of wars, famine, pestilences, earthquakes, but the end is not yet. All of you who feel COVID means the end of the world, the same way when you heard the earthquake hit Haiti the last time and you thought that was the end of the world, I want to let you know that these things are just parts and parcel of our existence as we head towards the end of time, right? So don't necessarily infer specific timelines as a result of this. It's simply to appreciate that this is the uncertain times in which we live, and soon Christ will put in his appearance, which because God has a plan. So in Matthew 24:15 and in Mark 13:14, Jesus actually makes a reference to Daniel the prophet. So here is Jesus centuries later making reference to Daniel, which means that Jesus himself is using a historicist approach to interpreting Daniel. Paul did the same thing when he talked about the events before Christ's second coming. So this historicist method of interpreting the scriptures, which again, all I'm saying that it is simply an approach that says from the time of the prophet to the time of the end, a number of events will unfold that will eventually lead to the cataclysmic rise and return of Jesus Christ coming in the clouds of glory. That's a fair enough expectation, and it just simply means that progressively along the way, things will happen. I think I can take some questions. Any questions on preterism, historism, and idealism and futurism? Any questions? Those who wish to unmute can unmute now.
I'll go first.
Yes, ma'am.
Which view can we say was used the time of Noah?
In the time of
Noah.
Noah.
Mhm.
I'll come to that. I'll come to that in the next section. When we
Okay.
get to Noah, I think we need to have a conversation around classical versus apocalyptic prophecies. So some prophecies, some prophets and prophecies, what we call classical prophecies, they were related to specific events at specific times. And then some prophecies had this span of world history that was pushing all the way down to the end. In the case of Noah, it was a classical prophecy. These four approaches are really the approaches around the apocalyptic prophecies. When people talk about the end of time, how do they choose to interpret it? Yeah. But I'll come to that as the next set of slides. Any other questions on this section? Anybody? Good question, man. As always start off COVID press releases, press updates here. Good question, and then you don't really get answer. But anyway. Anybody else? We can move on. And let's keep going. I just drop in some key things. If we follow historism as our approach to unlocking the Bible, then there are some key things, right? Revelation, and I just drop in these. Of course, we'll keep coming back to these as we go along. When we see the words seas mentioned in prophecy as a symbol, then from Revelation 17:15, which is just one of the texts, and there's a key one, we can interpret seas to mean people. When we see wind, especially raging wind, we assume it's wartime. Again, we pull that from Jeremiah 49:36 and 37. And then, of course, when we see beasts, we can interpret that to mean kingdoms of the world or nations of the world. This one, of course, is easy because we'll be talking about this in Daniel a lot. And he used beasts to represent kingdom. There's a little wordplay that occurred in this that I liked that came out in last quarter's lesson. When God made man, he gave man control over the beasts of the earth. But as time went on and man disobeyed God, became sinful, one of the things that as a consequence was that the beasts of the earth started to terrorize man. Animals and the lions became fearful. If you see a snake now, you run, because the beasts almost look like they have greater control than us. Granted, we extincting them and we destroy the planet, etc. But at the end of the day, they still look like they're in control. And it seems as if God is saying in his prophecies, he's representing a lawful man, or a man who is no longer under God's control, as a beast in terms of a kingdom. Yeah. So that is a little flip of the script that occurs where God first created a situation where man would have been in control of the beast, but as man departed from God, the beast almost became wild and controlled. And God is saying, if your kingdoms are not really following what I want and following me, etc., then I see them as beastly kingdoms. And that's just a little truth you can keep in your mind, because it will help you as we go along with the interpretation. So again, when we're doing prophetic interpretations, These are some keys we're holding, and I taken this for granted. I won't spend much time proving it, but you would see it evolving as we go along. When we see references C's, we think about people. And by the way, if there is no sea and plenty land, then it means an absence of people, right? And then if you see wind, it means war. In Revelation, we come to a reference where God is holding back the four winds of the earth. It's almost as if God is holding back strife and war and stress upon the earth. And then when we see beasts, we make a reference to kingdoms. The other thing we need to know is that in biblical language, emanating primarily from Numbers and Ezekiel and Ezra, we have a view where one day is equal to a year. So again, I'm making this clear. This is in the context of prophetic interpretation. You know, I know this story a long time. A man used to say that he owed up a guy who was a priest some money, and the priest came back to him and he said, "Where's my money?" He said, "Well, you know, in your beliefs, for God, a day is like a million years." He said, "What I have to do with that?" He said, "When they pay me back, he's saying a million years." So, or next day, he really meant he taking it for a long time, right? That's not what we're talking about.
Yom Tov.
Yes.
Shouldn't it be 360 days?
Yeah, it should be. When we get to actual 42 weeks and stuff, we're talking 360. But I just use it for now to drive home the point that when we talk about a year, we talk 360. But that is a more contemporary thing.
Okay, all right, no problem.
Yeah, so that's a good point, Clinton, that this is, I use the 365 because I use an image to just say one day equal a year, but really in biblical times, they followed a lunar calendar, which assumed that there was basically 28 to 30 days in the month, which would kind of get it about 360 days as a year. All right, so when we actually come to overall calculations, that's what we use. This was really just to give you something to jog your memory, right? But it's not meant to, the bigger thing is the yearly principle. That's a good point. In the next iteration of this, I'll take it on. So in Numbers, chapter 33, 14, 33, and 34, it says, "And your children shall wander in the wilderness 40 years, and bear your arms until the carcasses be wasted in the wilderness. After a number of days which have searched the land, 40 days, and each day for a year," right? So that was where it was kind of interpreted. And then in Ezekiel 4:6, it says, "And when thou hast accomplished them, lie again on thy right side, and thou shalt bear the iniquity of the house of Judah. 40 days of appointed each day for a year." So the thing about this is, these are discoveries within the scriptures that make sense when we try to work out the prophecy. And that's why I use the word keys. You know, it's like trying to open up a house you get and you're trying to figure out which room has what. And then you find a bunch of keys and you say, but you know, this key would work in that door. A lot of these things would have come after the fact as the ancient scholars tried to figure out what the Bible was saying. And they would have recognized that there were little keys lodged in the scriptures. And one of them was that in prophetic time, if you use where you saw days, so for instance, there's a 2300 days prophecy in Daniel, and then there's a 70-week prophecy which equals to 490 days. If you use years instead, it works out. Now, of course, you have to be using years a day for a year on the premise that you are following a historicist approach. Because if you are following a preterism approach, you may very well find that you might find yourself ending up somewhere around 80 something when you use the 2300 days. And that is why there was some I don't know, attractiveness, if you will, to that approach to prophetic interpretation. Because it seems to almost fit that, but things are still happening. So you begin to ask yourself, well, how can I make those things work? And then you realize that if you use one day for a year, those things will work. So these are two of the key texts, if you will, that gives us the basis for that. these are some just general Christian timelines. I won't spend long on that, but just to say that in the early days, we will start off with Christ and his birth, and then Christ, of course, died. We had Peter in Jerusalem. We had AD 70, when we had AD 70 when Jerusalem was destroyed by Titus, the Roman governor. And that's interesting. If you have a chance to read about the destruction of Jerusalem and Great Controversy, I encourage you to do that. It's a really graphic detail that occurs. And then you had bishops of Rome who rule and control. This becomes important when we begin to understand the East versus West Roman Empire and what happened and how we try to keep the West going while the East was happening. Stephen was stoned around AD 33, 36, somewhere inside of there. But we know exactly when that is when we come to the prophecies. It's not necessarily our churches. I just pull this off the net as a timeline, but to just let you know that the timeline is valid for all of us. The other one, this was a little bit busy, but all it says is that in the early days after the New Testament era, there was really just one Christian church, which was the Catholic Church, right? The Catholic means the whole church. And as time went on, it was only towards maybe in the early 12th century that you found there was a split and you had the Eastern Orthodox Church and that kind of stuff. But all of that was still going on up to this time. So again, that was really just when we get to dealing with some of the historical stuff, we need to bear in mind that there was only one Christian church at the time. And indeed, they were considered to be the prominent church. 1844, I think, was quite down here. And some of the other, like us, came into being, and some of the other Protestantism and stuff crept in around almost 500 years ago. All right? Just for keeping us within our context. Right. Any more questions? Great. So let's get into Daniel itself, and we start with book 1 as the main thing. This is our main theme for today. So Nebuchadnezzar entered Jerusalem 3 times to subdue it. This was what we studied last quarter. I'll just recap it quickly. The last time was around 586 BC. Jerusalem was completely destroyed and the people of Israel were deported to Babylon, right? Remember, this is a trek by foot. This is a long trek. Every time I think about this, I think about my knee and say, boy, I'd rather die along the way, right? This had to be bad. I've done a boat or plane kind of here, right? You would have had around 597 BC. He took some of the craftsmen and the blacksmith. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was not a stupid king. Nebuchadnezzar was extremely smart and extremely cunning. And he understood that part of hegemony as practiced by him was imperial approach, which was not unique to him. When the, there was a time when England ruled the world, right? And we used to say, our parents knew that the sun never set on the British Empire because it was such a huge empire. And different parts of the British Empire will contribute to the might of England. So you would find that a lot of the linen and some of the stuff that came from India would find its way back to England. And then you would find that some of the animals and some of the gold and the precious metals from Africa will find their way back to Europe, etc. Similarly, Nebuchadnezzar, when he invaded nations, his approach to invasion was twofold. He will take whatever riches they have and confiscate it on behalf of the Babylonian Empire. But he would look for their smartest people and put them to work for him. However, Nebuchadnezzar practiced significant brainwashing. So you couldn't just come to work in Babylon unless you were controlled by Babylon and you had adopted Babylonian thinking. You have to remember that when we get later on into other prophecies, Babylon didn't just control your hands and your feet. Babylon controlled your mind. So when Daniel, they were made eunuchs, when their names were changed to Belshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that wasn't just an accidental approach by a crazy king. He was playing on their mind. He wanted them to think like Babylonians, act like Babylonians, behave like Babylonians. Because in his mind, if that happened, then he would have created a generation of Babylonians who would continue way beyond his time. And Nebuchadnezzar was always concerned about life after he died. which is why Daniel chapter 3 built a single golden image rather than one made up in parts. And then we find that in 605 BC was when you have most likely come, and the idea, as I said it here, was to Babylonize these princes and make them loyal to Babylon. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, right? So their names will change to Belshazzar and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So that's kind of what we were told about the experience. The first thing we kind of looked at is that God remains in control. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about how through diet and through culture, he attempted to brainwash them. But the important thing is that when we remain faithful to God, even when we are under heavy Babylonian influence, God gives us good results. Amen? And that's the key, really, that even in this world, when it may seem difficult to remain a good Christian, if we maintain our allegiance to the God of heaven, even as we live in this world and we are confronted with the music and with the culture, etc., if we remain faithful, God promises that we will prosper and we will come out superior and perfect. Yeah? So let's talk a little bit about the captivity. Again, I go back to my maps. Judea is here, and they were part of the southern kingdom. As who was being invaded, the northern kingdom, the Israelites had already started to assimilate with the Syrians on this side. So you remember that when the Jews went back home, the northern neighbors said to them, let's help you build a temple. And they said no, because you have already polluted yourself with the Syrians. And that's how we have the Samaritans. And that's why the Jews will never like any Samaritans, because they saw them as having become polluted as Christians, right? And as Jewish people. So the Jews, Daniel and friends will have had to take this long journey to Babylon. And then if you got so far away, according to the music man, you'd find yourself in a situation where you would think you would never get back to Jerusalem. And therefore there is a temptation. Remember that song, that psalm that says, how can I sing the Lord's song in a strange land by the rivers of Babylon? You understand? Because that is what was happening. The Jews had lost hope. And really, we need to give Daniel and his friends good credit for staying faithful to God in this period, because everywhere around them said it's futile to think after all this long journey, you could make it back. But later on, when they got the decrees from Cyrus, etc., by the way, Cyrus was prophesied in the book of Isaiah, but that's the next story. When they got the decrees from Cyrus, etc., and they went back, they found that they could, it was like a joy for Daniel after the 70 years to know that they could actually go back into Babylon. And that is why when we get to Daniel chapter 10, Daniel is so troubled because the news he gets from Jerusalem suggests that while they're trying to build the wall, drama is taking place. And he is really troubled because he doesn't want to go back to the point where they have to stay in Babylon. Now, compare that to the Jews who left Israel and went down to Egypt under Joseph's period. And they would have spent a long time and then had to make the trek back. They could have get back to Canaan in 40 days. But because of the deliberateness and stuff, they end up wandering in the wilderness here and then coming back up eventually, right? But that is to tell you how close it was. This is a whole different ball game. This is really far. But that was what Nebuchadnezzar wanted. So when he got them this far, he said, first of all, I make you eunuchs. You can't keep propagating. I cut off all your hair, the other follow my stuff and eat my food and follow my ways. And the best ones, the brightest ones, would have ended up in his kingdom. That was no excuse to be done, sir. Just had to be bright and it would still reach the king's kingdom, right? So again, just another view of Israel's captivity and that drama that we discussed. Any questions? So let's talk about classical versus apocalyptic prophecies, right? So again, this comes from last quarter's lesson, so don't feel like being so smart, right? So what William Johnson in his very classical work now said was that when you look at the prophecies of people like Isaiah and Jeremiah, they contain vision and symbols from actual things. Their main goal is to communicate the word of the Lord. The fulfillment of their prophecy depends on how the people responded to them. So you asked about Noah, Melissa. So Noah's message, and even Jonah had a prophecy to Nineveh. And his prophecy was, God will destroy this nation. And he thought he was dropping a real bad message after he came out the belly of the whale and thing. And then the people said, listen, I'm not making sense. I mean, let's give ourselves back up to God and give up our old ways. And God said, okay, on the condition that you have repented, I will not destroy Nineveh anymore. And Jonah was upset because it made him look like if he was a false prophet, right? But in the fact is, God had a bigger plan. Similarly, we find ourselves saying that some of those prophecies, Noah, Jeremiah, Isaiah, were directly related to Israel, and they were related to Israel as a nation. This is important. When you listen to men like Hagee and some of the others on the TV screen these days, they are invoking a lot of these prophecies that were very specific to Israel as a nation when they went back. And they're extrapolating that into apocalyptic vibes to suggest that it relates to the end time. You have to be real careful about that. The ones that are apocalyptic were really the prophecies of Daniel. These prophecies are unconditional. They have nothing to do with how the people serve God or not. God is rolling out what will happen towards the end of time, all the way from the prophet's time to the end of time, right? And that, to me, is an extremely important demarcation that we need to pay attention to. I know we run out of time, but let's see if we can finish. So, just a quick note, the apocalyptic prophecies were revealing in nature in so much as they disclose what was hidden from human sight and knowledge, right? The message preserved in the books such as Isaiah were designated for the classical prophecy. And then the apocalyptic prophecies also discloses God's long range and unconditional. This is an important word. There are no conditions to this. God will bring an end to Earth's history with a focus on the end of human history and pointed to a time when God will bring the present world to a close, right? And then the last point here is classical prophecy, however, focuses mainly on God's conditional plan for national Israel within the bounds of the covenant. That's all right? So Melissa, that clears it up? Great. So let's keep going. So time-wise, we know that the book of Daniel, notice I like how they depicted this, the same text we read in Ezekiel 4:6. When thou hast completed them, lie again on your right-hand side, and you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Judah for 40 days. I have laid you a day for a year, right? So that was what that was. Let's keep going. The empires described in Daniel 7, 2, and 8 are in line with history. So we know that we really had a Roman Empire, we really had a Greek Empire, we really had a Medo-Persian Empire, and really had a Babylonian Empire, right? The time periods can be applied to history by using the year-date prophecy. If we work at the time periods and we use year-date prophecy, that is applicable. And then Jesus himself made a reference to Daniel's prophecy when he talked about the destruction of Jerusalem, right? In Matthew 24:15, and then again in Luke, right? So again, it kind of makes the case for the historicist approach to interpretation. Of course, the early church fathers use the same approach, as well as even people like Isaac Newton and some of those ancient philosophers. When they looked at Bible prophecy, they took that long-scale historicist approach, right? All right, let's see how fast we can move. The literary structure of Daniel. You all want to keep going? We finished just now. We have a few more slides. Yes? And let's keep going. So I want to establish some key things here, right? Daniel was written in both Hebrew and Aramaic. Aramaic was the international language around that time, right? So chapters 2 to 7 were written in Aramaic. It's almost to suggest, well, these are things that related to world powers. And then the other chapters, which are more focused on the Jewish nation, were written in Hebrew. So that's an important nugget to note and keep in mind. Now, the book of Daniel follows what in Hebrew literature is called a chasmic structure. It's almost like a mirror image. If you read some of the Psalms, they're in that kind of mode where they start off with one thing, they say something in the middle and they finish off with the other thing. Now, we are accustomed to, those of us who went to college and you have to write reports and then you're accustomed, or even when you're preaching, then you're accustomed to an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. In the old Hebrew days, that's not necessarily how they wrote. They sometimes will tell you something, they will come back and tell you it again in the next way, they'll come back and tell you it in another way, and each time as they repeated it, they expanded a little bit more. So in the case of Daniel, we have a vision of the empires of the world in Daniel chapter 2. But then in Daniel chapter 7, we also have a vision of the empires of the world. It's a mirror image of what we got in Daniel chapter 2. In Daniel chapter 2, he used a man in a gold, breast and arms of silver, feet of iron and clay, belly of brass. In Daniel chapter 7, he used a lion with wings. He used a leopard. He used a lopsided bear. He used an animal that couldn't be defined and described. Same cities and kingdoms he was represented. In Daniel chapter 3, God delivers from the fiery furnace. In Daniel chapter 6, God delivers from the lion's den. Again, a mirror image is occurring here, where it is emphasizing the lay of the land in terms of how the world will run, but it also talks about the fact that God is still in control, even when we are in trouble. Is that all right? And you should remember that, even though COVID is all around us, God is still in control. God has a plan. And then Nebuchadnezzar is judged, meaning that someday or the other, evil will come to an end. Belshazzar is also judged. So that is a kind of mirror image that takes place there, and it kind of shows God's sovereignty. This is repeated again when we look at, let me just go through this quickly. So these are, and I know we'll come to this in detail when we go to the next chapter, but you all know it before, so we can talk it. The head of gold was Babylon. We had Persia, Greece, Rome, Europe, eternal kingdom. By the way, we are not guessing this. The actual script in the Bible gives us these answers. We're not figuring it out. Right? So in Daniel chapter 2, he said, you are the head of gold, which is Babylon. Said what will come after. And then later we got on to chapter 7 and stuff, he actually called them by different names, right? So we know this. So this is what we had as a parallel in chapter 7. So where he had a head of gold, which was precious metal. We had the king of the beast with wings, goes fast. Then we had the lopsided bear who took out 3 bones in his mouth of startup. And we talk about that, how Persia came up. And then we have the Greece, but now we get a little bit more detail. He repeats it, but a little bit more detail. Notice in each time, so he just said, you are the head of gold in chapter 2. But in chapter 7, he says, you are the king of the beast, but you move real fast. And then he says, you are Persia. But in chapter 3, in chapter 7, he said, you had one side higher than the next, and you take down 3 kings to come into power. In chapter 2, we are told that Greece will come up, but now we are told Greece comes up fast, and it has 4 heads. After Alexander died, there were 4 generals who ran the place. And then Rome was iron, an iron kingdom. But then he says he will take on a kind of demeanor that we can't even describe. You're first, you're bad. Right? And then we talk about the eternal kingdom, but he says that even before the eternal kingdom comes, there will be a judgment. Right? So with each repetition, the Hebrew approach to this thing is given more and more detail, right? In chapters 8 to 9, he starts off in Persia, and again, he continues all the way down. And again, there's another example of the historicist approach. When Daniel got his vision, Babylon had already expired. So he started off from the time of when the prophet was living to the end of time, right? Again, consistent approach. And then in chapters 10 to 12, we talk about the fact that Michael's son. There's a key point to note here, which I always like to drop these nuggets because it helps you keep this thing in your mind. The book of Daniel begins with God's people in captivity by a Babylon nation. And it ends with Michael, who is Jesus Christ, leading his people into everlasting life. The message here is always that I don't care how rough things get, God has a plan and he will save the world. This is no time to jump off the God wagon if you are part of that, right? The main themes of chapter 1, of course, is that God is in control. I'll run through these very quickly. Even though they were in captivity, God was still in control. God had actually predicted that Nebuchadnezzar will come or Babylon will come and take control of Israel for 70 years. So this is him being in control. We talk about about Nebuchadnezzar paganizing. Babylon attempts to paganize. So he changed their names. He wanted them to eat his food. He changed the education system to teach them Babylonian culture. He changed their diet so they become more like him. They weren't eating fruits and vegetables, but they were eating more heavy meat. That meat looking like somebody I don't care. It was a real attempt, if you will. Babylon didn't just capture, Babylon brainwashed. That is important. Keep that in mind. He wants not just your hands and your feet and your head, he wants your head as well, right? Use diet. We need to remember that how we eat today determines our strength. We could spend a whole day preaching around this, but just remember that even in this time, God was reminding us that how we eat determines how we will be able to manage. Some of us where we cannot walk and go and visit friends and stuff, try to eat properly. So when this COVID over, we don't be overweight too much. I'm talking to myself as well. Right, the key to note is that if we remain faithful, God is able to keep us perfect. Is that all right? And that he's also able to make us superior. God's ways are superior to man's ways. And that's important to our young people as you are confronted with the culture and the education of this world. Sometimes church life looks boring. I want to say to you, if you delve into these details and these prophecies, church life can become exciting and God's ways are superior to man's ways. Now, one of the things I wanted to also emphasize is that Jesus is in the center of all scripture. He's like a golden thread throughout scripture, and it is even more important in the book of Daniel, right? So in chapter 1, just as how similar to Daniel's story, Jesus left heaven to live on earth, and he received wisdom from above, right? Daniel left Jerusalem to live in Babylon, and he received wisdom from God while he was there. John tells us that God left heaven and came to live on earth, and we know that God received wisdom. We know that Jesus' kingdom will replace all kingdoms. We know that when you're in trouble, Jesus walks with us. That's important to remember. And that Jesus took Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom away from him for some time. So we understand that he who reigns, that God is the one who reigns over all kingdoms. And that's important to remember in today's world, right? If we continue these identifying marks, in chapter 5, it shows that Babylon, even as powerful as it was, will one day come to an end. All kingdoms come to an end. And that there was a plot against Daniel, similar to the priests and the Pharisees who plotted against Jesus. This will also become important as we get to the end of time. And then Daniel chapter 7 tells how the Son of Man receives the kingdom. He reigns forever. And in Daniel chapter 8, introduced Jesus as our high priest in the heavenly sanctuary, right? In Daniel chapter 9, Jesus is sacrificed in the new covenant. And then in Daniel chapters 10 to 12, Jesus is the commander-in-chief, the real commander-in-chief. Not that fella in the US, right? And he runs things. All right, so I'm coming to the end now. The book of Daniel contains important lessons for us in the 21st century. And these are the 3 lessons. God is sovereign over our lives. You can think that your life is a life of chance. Look at all that happened to Daniel. But in all of this, God was still in control. The other thing is that God is in control of history. He quietly and patiently controls history and fulfill his plans on the nation's history. You know, as an Adventist growing up in this church, I would remember all these end time scenarios, and I would say to myself quietly, not to these older elders, I would say to them, they are crazy, those things can't happen. Well, after 9/11, and then after Corona, I am clear anything can happen. I am clear that when you could be told not to buy and sell, because people are now being told they can't buy and sell. I am clear that aeroplanes could fall out of the sky and not operate, and everybody stay home. In other words, these are uncharted and unprecedented times that kind of says that the end time events as laid out in the Bible is possible. And therefore it makes us even more inquisitive and curious to follow what God had to say in his word, right? God provides an example to follow in the end time. Don't compromise your faith. Remain faithful to your commitment to God. Be useful for the country and the society in which you live. And this is important. A lot of us kind of feel that if we are Christians, then we are not to do with the world. Daniel still worked for Nebuchadnezzar. He still gave him good service. He still made sure the kingdom was looked after, but he remained faithful to his God. And when his service to Nebuchadnezzar clashed with his service to God, he picked God. Right? And that to me is extremely important, especially for young people. As you go out there and you deal with the world and the world of work, you can remain faithful to God. And White talks about the fact that this word opened by the infinite God to frighten human beings, recorded on the prophetic page and traced in the pages of history, declares that God is the ruling power. I think that is my last slide. So, we'll open the floor for questions if there are any. And if they are not, I'll ask you just to answer the poll questions that pop up on your screen so we can kind of figure out how we go along as we go through. Everybody all right? Any questions? All right. I can maybe stop sharing and we can all say hello to each other.